There was a man who helped build California, and yet not everyone believed he should have. He wasn't a president, he wasn't a general, but at one point in time, Charles Crocker held something just as powerful: control over the rails that connected the entire West. And with that control came wealth, influence, and controversy that would follow his name for generations. This is the story of a man who rose from almost nothing to become one of the most powerful figures in California history. Charles Crocker wasn't born into wealth. He didn't inherit power. In fact, like many who came west, he arrived chasing opportunity during a time when California itself was still being shaped. But while others searched for gold, Crocker saw something bigger. He saw the future. A future built not on what lay beneath the ground, but on what could connect it all together: railroads. It was a vision that would transform him from a struggling businessman into one of the infamous Big Four, the men who would build the Central Pacific Railroad and reshape the American West forever. But power on that scale never comes quietly. Behind the success, there were questions. Behind the empire, there were costs. And behind the legacy of progress, there were people who paid the price. To some, Charles Crocker was a visionary, a builder of modern California. To others, he was a symbol of unchecked power and ruthless ambition. So how did one man rise so far, so fast? And what really happened behind the tracks that changed everything? Because this wasn't just the story of a railroad. It was the story of power, conflict, and a legacy that still shapes California today. And it all began with a gamble. Long before the railroads, before the power, the wealth, and the influence, Charles Crocker was just another man chasing a chance. He was born in 1822 in a modest farming family in New York. There was no fortune waiting for him, no powerful name to lean on, just hard work and the quiet belief that something bigger was possible. Like many Americans of his time, Crocker moved west, step by step, working as a blacksmith, a farmer, anything that would keep him moving forward. But everything changed in 1849, the gold rush. Thousands rushed to California, hoping to strike it rich overnight, and Crocker followed. But unlike most, he didn't come looking for gold in the rivers. He came looking for opportunity. At first, it wasn't glamorous. He opened a small dry goods store in Sacramento. Long days, tight margins, constant uncertainty. But Crocker wasn't just surviving, he was learning. Learning how money moved, how people traded, how cities grew. And slowly, he began to see patterns others missed. Sacramento wasn't just a boom town, it was becoming a hub. And Crocker positioned himself right at the center of it. His business grew, his reputation followed. Soon, he wasn't just a shopkeeper, he was a respected figure in the community. And then, he made another move: politics. Crocker served in the California State Assembly, giving him something even more valuable than money: connections, influence, access to the decisions shaping the future of the state. But even then, this was just the surface, because somewhere along the way, Crocker realized something critical. The real fortune wouldn't come from gold. It would come from controlling how everything moved: goods, people, entire cities. And that realization would change everything. Because soon, he would meet the men who shared that same vision. Men who weren't just thinking about California, but about connecting an entire nation. And when that moment came, Charles Crocker was ready. This was just the beginning.
This wasn't just a business idea anymore. It was a race against time. In the early 1860s, the vision became real. a railroad that would cross the Sierra Nevada, connect California to the rest of the United States, and change the country forever. At the center of it stood four men: Leland Stanford, Collis Huntington, Mark Hopkins, and Charles Crocker, the Big Four. Each brought something different: money, strategy, politics. But Crocker, he brought execution. He was the one on the ground, overseeing the labor, the construction, the impossible task ahead. Because what they were trying to build had never been done before. The Sierra Nevada mountains weren't just difficult, they were brutal. Solid granite, freezing winters, avalanches that could bury entire crews in seconds. Progress was slow, painfully slow, and time was not on their side. The Union Pacific was building from the east, and whoever built faster would win more land, more power, more control. The pressure was relentless. Deadlines loomed. Investors demanded results. Failure was not an option. So Crocker made a decision that would define the project. He hired thousands of Chinese laborers. At first, many doubted them, questioned their strength, their endurance. But soon, those doubts disappeared, because these workers did what others could not. They carved tunnels through solid rock, hung from cliffs with explosives, endured freezing temperatures, dangerous conditions, and constant risk. Day after day, step by step, the railroad pushed forward. It was more than construction, it was survival. And slowly, mile by mile, the impossible began to take shape. Steel cutting through mountains, tracks stretching across a continent, until finally, in 1869, the rails met, east and west connected, a nation transformed, and at the center of it all stood Charles Crocker, victorious, powerful, untouchable. But behind the triumph, there were sacrifices. Behind the success, there were questions. And behind the empire, there was a cost few could ignore. Because building something this massive never comes without consequences. But success came at a cost.
Success changed everything. For Charles Crocker, it brought power beyond imagination. But it also brought something else: scrutiny. As the railroad expanded, so did its influence, prices, land, access. The railroads didn't just connect California anymore, they controlled it, and people began to notice. Farmers complained of rising shipping costs. Small businesses struggled under railroad pricing. Entire communities felt dependent on decisions made by a handful of men like Crocker. To his supporters, he was a builder, a man who helped turn California into a modern state. But to his critics, he was something very different. A symbol of monopoly power, of wealth concentrated in the hands of a few, of a system where influence could outweigh fairness. And nowhere was that divide more visible than in San Francisco. By the 1870s, Crocker had built a massive mansion on Nob Hill, a symbol of his success. But right beside it stood something unexpected: a small home owned by a man who refused to sell, no matter the pressure, no matter the offers. So Crocker did something that shocked many. He built a massive wall around the property, a barrier, a statement. To some, it was petty. To others, it was power on display. The incident spread across newspapers, fueling a growing image of Crocker, not just as a builder, but as a man willing to use his wealth to get his way. And yet, the story wasn't that simple. Because at the same time, Crocker donated to charities, supported education, invested in the future of the state he helped shape. Two sides of the same man, visionary and controversial, admired and resented. So which was he really? A pioneer who built the foundation of modern California? Or a powerful figure who benefited from a system tilted in his favor? By the end of his life, those questions still lingered. And as the years went on, Charles Crocker would begin to step away from the spotlight, leaving behind an empire and a legacy that was far from settled.
In the end, even the most powerful men step away. By the late 1870s, Charles Crocker had already done what few could ever imagine. He had helped build a railroad empire, shaped the future of California, and secured a place among the most influential figures of his time. But time moves on. Crocker spent his later years largely removed from the intense battles that once defined his life. The work had been done, the empire had been built, and the world he helped create was already beginning to evolve. On August 14, 1888, Charles Crocker died at the age of 66. He left behind immense wealth, a powerful family legacy, and a business empire that would continue long after him. His son would carry on the name, the railroad would expand even further, and California would never be the same. Because the tracks he helped lay did more than move goods and people. They connected cities, created industries, accelerated growth. They turned California into something bigger, something modern. But with that transformation came lasting questions. Progress often comes with a price, and Crocker's story is no exception. To some, he remains a visionary, a man who saw the future before anyone else did. To others, he represents a time when power was concentrated, when ambition overshadowed fairness, and when success came at the expense of others. So how should history remember Charles Crocker? As a builder of opportunity or a symbol of unchecked ambition? Maybe the truth lies somewhere in between, because legacies like his are never simple. They are built on achievement, but also shaped by consequence. And in the end, what Charles Crocker left behind wasn't just a railroad, it was a reminder that the people who shape the world often leave behind stories far more complicated than the tracks they build. And sometimes, the greatest legacies are the ones we're still trying to understand.